yourself when you talk, all right? Do you see where your unmute button is? Maybe it's down on the left hand, bottom left hand of the screen. There's a little microphone. Do you see it? I don't know if I can do that. Let me see if I can do that from where I am. I don't think I can. Did you find the button? There's a little button with a red microphone that has a slash through it. If you click on that, you should be able, because we can't hear you right now. You want to go ahead and do that? There you go. All right, now we should be all right. Okay.
All right.
Okay, good. All right, so we are recording the program, and I want to introduce to you tonight Norm and Nite. I think we're very privileged because there's nobody who knows the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Cleveland like he does. I just wanted to tell you that ever since he was a teenager, he was into the music scene, buying himself records there in Cleveland. And he just told me that he's friends with Ron Bradzinski, the former mayor of Philly, because they grew up together. And Norm was always interested in music. And he was a very popular DJ in Cleveland and in the New York City area. And because of those connections that he had with the music world and the celebrities in the music world, he was able to convince the committee to put the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here in Cleveland, and we're so glad that he did. He not only has written this book called The House That Rock Built, which is available at the library and of course online, but he wrote several volumes called Rock On, that deal with the different celebrities and the different time eras of music, of rock and roll. So if you're interested in that, you can also check those out and see what those have to offer, because they are very detailed about the different musicians and events that happened in Cleveland. And that's what I find so fascinating about this book. You know, you just think that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame appears on the shores of Lake Erie, but really it was a community effort. And of course, Norm, thank you very much, because you spearheaded that effort along with some very other important people in the Cleveland area. So without further ado, I want to turn over our program to Norm and Nite so that he can tell us about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and answer any questions that you might have. So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. All right? Okay, Norm, it's all yours.
Thank you, Cheryl. Two quick things. I will just show you a copy of the book that I've written along with Tom Farron called The House That Rock Built, which I'm very, very proud of. Thank you. And anyway, there's more information if you need to find out from me. You can go to my website, normnite.com. normnite.com. Well, talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I am, like now they have in the NFL draft tonight and tomorrow and Saturday, and they're always highlighting the fact that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And for me, it was a labor of love. This is something that started for me in 1982 and went until the Hall of Fame opened on September 1st, 1995. That journey took a long time. A lot of people worked diligently to make this thing happen. And I could talk for hours on it. But the most important thing for me is this, the fact that when I had an opportunity, there's three things I wanted to bring out. Number one is that singer Lesley Gore, who had the big hit, It's My Party and Judy's Turn to Cry and songs like that. If it hadn't been for her contacting me in 1983 to get involved with this project, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would never be here in Cleveland. So I would like to always say to the late Lesley Gore, thank you. And anytime you hear one of her records, realize that she's responsible for the Hall of Fame being here in Cleveland. The second thing, I just wanted to pull back the curtain on New York and Cleveland and all the people that were involved with this book, making this book happen. And finally, the Northeastern Ohio fans who on January 20th, 1986 in the USA Today polled, we had 110,000 calls and we had 660,000 people sign a petition paying homage. I just want to pay homage to all the fans of Northern Ohio and everyone else that brought the Hall of Fame here. And finally, this is the most important thing for me. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame cost $92 million to build. However, $199 million annual economic impact to Northeastern Ohio, 12 million visitors come to visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 80% of them came from out of town, and $2 billion has been generated for Cleveland and Cuyahoga County for the economy. There were in 2018, there were 570,000 visitors that came to visit Cleveland because of the Hall of Fame. 127 million was annually spent by Rock and Roll Hall of Fame visitors. 1,800 jobs have been generated, 59.9 million in total wages generated, and 36.5 million economic impact on the induction ceremonies, which will take place again this coming October. So for me to say this, I'm very proud of the book. It's a fascinating story about how Cleveland got the Hall of Fame, why Cleveland got the Hall of Fame. There's some phenomenal pictures from Janet McCosker and Stevie Van Zandt, who was a legend in rock and roll and acting, and that he wrote the foreword to the book. So all those things that I said, I'm very, very proud of. But the biggest thing is the book shines a spotlight on the Hall of Fame and the economic impact the Hall of Fame has here in Cleveland and forever. So that's what I'm very, very proud of. Okay.
Yes, I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask, Norm? Well, maybe, Norm, you could tell us, I was fascinated by the fact, like you said, where all the people called in and signed the petition and made it happen. How did you get the word out that that was happening?
Well, there were a lot of different ways when it finally leaked out, because originally it thought it was a done deal for New York City, that it was going to be in New York. And then when we got the foot in the door to be able to make our presentation in the summer of 1985, and people found out that there's Cleveland being considered, then Chicago, Los Angeles, New Orleans, all these other cities jumped on the bandwagon. They wanted to be able to bring the Hall of Fame to their respective cities. But what happened is the media here in Cleveland, they all joined, all the radio stations combined, all the TV stations. There were no rivalries or whatever. They all got behind this to let the word out that we want to get, and then there were disc jockeys like on WMMS, Kid Leo and Denny Sanders.
Oh, there you are.
Bruce Springsteen and all the others, and said, write a note why Cleveland should get the Hall of Fame. And we started getting all kinds of performers who saying Cleveland should be the place for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And of course, Alan Freed, who was the man who coined the phrase rock and roll, who I had the honor, along with the late Scott Muni, to induct into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on January 23rd, 1986, because he launched the very first rock show here in Cleveland on March 21st, 1952. And next year, it'll be already 70 years ago that happened. So he gave birth to that phrase. He gave birth to the rock and roll, and he was doing his show here from Cleveland, Ohio. So for all those different reasons, people jumped on the bandwagon. The word started getting out, and Cleveland, the enthusiasm of the fans and everything else made it a legitimate thing, and that's why Cleveland got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Plus the fact you had a lot of people like Mike Benz and all the other people that worked hard in Cleveland to get the money. The money. That's the whole thing. They were able to come up with the money, and money talks. And because they were able to put this package together, because a lot of cities wanted, but they couldn't come up with the money. So because there's a lot of people, and it's all explained in the book, how these people all work together. And there were times during that period from 1985, when we had our first meeting, until it was done the following year, 1986, when Cleveland was given the opportunity to get the Hall of Fame, when it was announced on May 5th of 1986, that we could have lost. And even when it was announced that we were going to get the Hall of Fame, through the years before it finally broke ground in 1993, there were a lot of ups and downs and things that I got phone calls from people saying, hey, I don't think it's going to happen. They're going to pull out and everything else. So it was a very, very interesting journey to see. But because of the enthusiasm, because of the work behind the people in Northern Ohio, and because of the way they work with the people in New York, it's been a reality. And this is going to be this is a signature, just like you have in Seattle, the Space Needle, just like you have the Statue of Liberty in New York, just like you have in Eiffel Tower in Paris. This is our signature to the city of Cleveland. And like I said, right now with the NFL draft, What are they talking about? They're playing on their breaks, they're playing Rock Around the Clock and songs like that to a national audience, 50 million people all over. And what are they doing? They're playing rock and roll songs and saying, home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So how much more can you do to your city? So right away, people from no matter where they're from, they think about Cleveland, they say, oh yeah, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So having that in Cleveland for perpetuity, it'll be an unbelievable thing, our signature for decades to come.
I think too, people from all over, not just Ohio and the United States come, but I think there are a lot of foreign visitors that come. I know that when we have exchange students here in our school, I say, okay, let's get a group of students together and go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame so they can see it, because they've all heard about it. They just don't know that it's so close. So it's wonderful. Yeah. I have a question. Tell us, wasn't there a concert or something beforehand that was like to convince people that this was where rock and roll was happening?
Well, here's the thing. Of course, we had the first concert, the Moondog, in 1952. And then when we were trying to decide, is this going to be a reality? Is this going to actually happen? There were so many questions on whether or not Cleveland was going to actually have this thing happen. Well, what happened was in the early part of 1986, after we had the thing going on with USA Today and everything else, that we were looking for something to be able to really solidify the deal. And I mentioned to Mike Benz and the people like Jules Belkin and Bill Smith and Bill Bryant and Hank LeConte and all those people like that. I said, listen, we're coming up, this is like in January or February. I said, March will be commemorating the anniversary of the Moondog Coronation Ball. So why don't we just do another Moondog Coronation Ball? And they all agreed. And in March 21st of 1986, we had Chuck Berry come into town, and he did a show at Terminal Tower. And also we had Chubby Checker in town. We showed Alan Freed movies in the downtown of the Playhouse Square. They did all kinds of things, and it was just such an overwhelming positive thing that happened. It convinced the people in New York that Cleveland is for real. Not only do they come up with money, but they come up with legitimate ideas, and look at the response. Because like I said, when you sign a petition like we had an opportunity for these people to do, and you get 660,000 people signing a petition, and you get 110,000 people phoning USA Today saying we want Cleveland, the nearest competitor, I think, was Memphis with about 3,000. That shows you how much the people in Northeastern Ohio wanted the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I think that the Moondog Coronation Ball that we did in March of 1986 was a solidifying thing to convince the people that on May 5th of 1986, they said, Cleveland, Ahmet Ertegun, the late Ahmet Ertegun said, we have chosen Cleveland as the site for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Awesome. Comments or questions from other people? What about the mayor and his role in all of this? Was he, I think he was supportive, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, sure. At first, Mayor Voinovich did not want to get involved with it because he thought this, is rock and roll that important or that big? But his children, they were so supportive of it. And they said, Dad, rock and roll is a major thing. You got to get yourself involved. And politicians, whether it was Mayor Voinovich or whether it was Congresswoman Mary Rose Okar, whether it was Governor Celeste, everything else, you started getting people to believe because the children were telling them, and the younger people saying, this is something that we must have. This is something that's very, and they convinced them. And then Mayor Voinovich really worked hard in working with Pat Sweeney and so many other people here in Cleveland to be able to make this thing happen. And I was so honored and I'm happy and pleased when they had the ribbon cutting ceremony on September 1st of 1995 at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And when you had Mayor Voinovich up on stage, and he was thanking a lot of people, and he singled me out. And I have that tape, which I'm so proud of, that he says, if it hadn't been for Norman Nite, there would be no Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. And he went on to express what he thought about me and everything. And I was just so floored by that and honored. So again, what it means to me is the fact that the economic impact. Yes, the book is great to do. The story about the Hall of Fame is great to do. However, the thing that's so important for me is the creating jobs. When you can say that you created close to 2,000, 1,800 jobs and almost $60 million in wages generated and everything else. And that, and then when they have the induction ceremony, like they will have it in here October 30th, almost $37 million of the economic impact in the city of Cleveland. That's big deal. That's important. So that's why I feel so honored and proud of the fact that being responsible for being able to guide the people to work hard to bring the Hall of Fame. So every time I ride by that Hall of Fame, I look at it, and so many of the people that worked there when I was doing my radio show from the Hall of Fame for almost 10 years, they would come up to me and they would come into the studio and say, "Thank you so much for my job. I really appreciate it." That meant more to me than anything else.
And it continues to generate jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. It wasn't just one-time deal. Well, Skip would like to know what the other cities were that were in competition.
Oh, there were probably about 10 of them. There was Los Angeles, there was San Francisco, there was Chicago, there was Philadelphia, there was New Orleans, New York. That's big. About 10 cities were in competition. And in the book, it'll explain why some of these other cities lost out for not being able to get, because they couldn't raise the money, or there was not the enthusiasm in the city, or whatever the case may be. But it's interesting that Cleveland had not only the spirit, but the money, and that's why we got the Hall of Fame.
And I remember several times in the book, it was like almost that the city couldn't come up with the money, and then people mobilized, and then it was there. So, that determination was something that the committee looked at too, that they could really see a commitment in Cleveland that wasn't in other places.
Cheryl, it's so hard to believe because, like I said, this journey for me began in 1982. And then now at the Hall of Fame, it's over 25 years since it's opened. We'll be approaching 26 years this September, quarter of a century. And for me, when I got involved with the Cleveland Group in 1985, and I think back, I says, where did all that time go? And unfortunately, there have been so many people that we have lost, whether it was Mike Belkin, whether it was Hank LeConte, whether it was the late, I'm trying to think of all the people that have passed away, but there were just so many that were involved with this thing at the very, very beginning. And you're glad that you're able to tell the story why so many of them are still around. Like even Ahmet Erdogan, the chairman of the board over in New York City, passed away. And like I said, there were just so many individuals, Pat Sweeney here in Cleveland. And, there's a lot, but because and what you want to do is you want to be able to thank the people while they still are around. Thank them so much for the work that they did to make this thing a reality. And for future generations, we have this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And maybe another 25 years from now, when they look back and they'll say, we're celebrating 50 years, they'll look at my book and they'll say, well, now we know the story of, because most people have said, why Cleveland? How come Cleveland got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? How come it's not in New York? How come it's not here? And one important line which has stayed with me is when I met in 1985, when that very first meeting, as I said, when I had an opportunity to meet with the late Hank LeConte and Mike Benz and Jules Belkin and Bill Smith and Bill Bryan in a meeting in Cleveland. They had me come in, and they said, would you go back to New York and ask them to consider Cleveland as a site for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And I flew back to New York, and I got together with Ahmet Erdogan, the chairman of the board, who was president of Atlantic Records. I came to his office and I sat down and I said, Ahmet, would you consider Cleveland as a site for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? He said, absolutely not, because Mayor Koch has promised us a brownstone on 42nd Street. And their idea at that particular time was to have a brownstone, because with real estate, you couldn't do what we did here in Cleveland. And they were going to have an annual year where they would have a celebration and let people put plaques on a wall and everything else like that. And if I had gotten up, shook his hand and say, thank you so much for your time, and walked out the door, how the heck, for that brief moment, the window of opportunity was closing. And I said to him, Ahmet, you have to consider first rock show, Cleveland. Cleveland's a neutral city. They're not like San Francisco with the hippie thing, or Los Angeles with the surf, or Detroit with like Motown. I said, and it's between Chicago, Pittsburgh, all these other cities, and real estate is cheaper. I must have hit the right button, because that's when he said, hey, let's go and consider Cleveland. So they set up the meeting for Cleveland, July 18th, 1985. And I got in touch with people of Cleveland and said, I got your foot in the door. The point of this whole thing is this: if you believe in something, don't take no for an answer. Because on that fateful day in May of 1985, if I had said to Ahmet, thank you so much for your time, called up Mike Benz in Cleveland, said, Mike, it's not going to happen. Then all of a sudden, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is maybe 1 or 2 buildings on 42nd Street with plaques on the wall. And none of this is going on here in Cleveland. So that's the thing, that the one lesson to learn.
Right, right. Very true. Roxanne wants to know why Lesley Gore. Talk to us about that conversation you had with her, and why did she call you?
Well, I first met Lesley Gore. There used to be a national television show called The Mike Douglas Show. Yeah, if you all remember, way back when. And on January 22nd, 1968, I flew to Philadelphia because I had an album out. I narrated an album called Rock and Roll Evolution or Revolution. And I was a guest on, and Bobby Darin was the co-host. So I was there with Bobby Darin, Mike Douglas, Lesley Gore, and Guy Marks, who was a comic. And that's when we first met. And we kept in touch. And many times I'd call her up and put her on my show, and we talked about her career and everything else like that. Well, when this was all starting to happen, on August 2nd, 1983, Lesley called me up because she says there's going to be a meeting on East 28th Street in Manhattan on August 10th. They have some people, because she knew of my background. She knew I was a rock and roll historian. And she says, we'd like you to be part of this meeting because they're talking about a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Would you be a part of this meeting? And I said, absolutely. So I went to the meeting. And at first, that very first meeting on August 10th of 1983, there was people in the meeting from Radio City Music Hall and a couple of recording artists, but no major names. And I went to a couple of these meetings. I said to myself, you know what? Nothing's going to happen. I'm wasting my time with that. Then one person, Susan Evans, who was a top person, a lawyer and involved with a lot of important people. She called me in January of 1984, and she says, we're having a meeting, and Ahmet Ertegun, who was respected in the business, is the top person in the industry and president of Atlantic Records, and he's going to be the chairman of the Hall of Fame Foundation. And they got Seymour Stein from Sire Records, Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone, Walter Yetnikoff, Mo Austin, Clive Davis, John Hammond, Robert Stigwood. When you put these people together, I said to myself, I know this is going to happen. So when I got involved with those people at that particular time and attending all the meetings, and that's when Cleveland found out that I was involved with Mike Benz in that. And that's when they say, hey, Norman's involved with all these heavyweights in New York. Why don't we contact him? And that's what they did in 1985. But again, going back to that original question, well, Lesley Gore was a very, very special person in my life. And she's the reason why that I was able to go and get involved with this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And unfortunately, she passed away 6 years ago. But I just want to be able to draw attention to her, because a lot of people, they'll play the record, Judy's Turn to Cry, or so many other songs that she had that in her career, because she had a nice long list of songs. Anyway, I'd like for them to, once in a while, when they play one of her records, to simply say, you know what? Believe it or not, this young lady is the reason why Cleveland has the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that's my whole thing with her, because that phone call that I received from her on August 2nd, 1983 changed everything. And I'll never forget her for that.
Of course, Skip is of the opinion that you don't need more reason than to simply say Alan Freed And that would be reason enough to have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland because he was so instrumental. And you had referred to that earlier, but Skip agrees.
Yeah, he was there was no question about it. But then again, you know, everybody's going to say in Memphis, they're going to say Sam Phillips, look what he did. He discovered Elvis, he discovered Johnny Cash, he discovered Roy Orbison, you know, and you go to all these other cities, they're going to bring up people and names and legitimate names and say this is why these people should be considered for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But Alan Freed, again, there's no question that he was the guy who really made things happen. He came up from Salem, Ohio, then to work in Akron, Ohio, then he went up to Cleveland, Ohio. And then when he left in September '54 to go to New York City to work at WINS, being in the #1 market there, everything changed. He started doing movies, he started doing everything. But unfortunately, he died, 43 in January of 1965. And, you know, he was a big star at one time, but then all the people forgot what he did to the industry and everything else. And he was a forgotten man. Unfortunately, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Like I said, I had the opportunity with the late Scott Muni to induct him at the Waldorf Astoria in the Hall of Fame. And now his remains are at the Lakefront Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio. On a beautiful, we had a dedication there, I think about 5 or 6 years ago. And it's just that he's home.
He certainly is. Other questions or comments?
I was curious. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
Larry.
Norman Knight has met probably a lot of famous people, and I was just curious as to what was his biggest thrill. I mean, who did he meet that stands out in his mind as his biggest thrill of meeting somebody?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to meet so many individuals, you know, whether they're movie stars, rock stars, celebrities, whatever the case may be. If I had to answer that question, musically, it would be Chuck Berry, because the relationship I had with him for so many years, and how brilliant he was, how articulate he was, as a very soft-spoken, sensitive man who everybody considers the first man in rock and roll. There's no question about it. And the other person that really meant a lot to me is when I had an opportunity to spend some time in 1971 with Ed Sullivan, because from 1947 or 48 until 1971, he reigned supreme on CBS TV on Sunday nights. Introduced Elvis, introduced the Beatles, introduced just about everybody. He had the biggest show on TV. And then when the show ended, you know, he sat in his apartment on Park Avenue at the Delmonico Hotel, and nobody was calling him or anything else. So I called him and invited me over to his apartment, and I sat there with Sylvia and he and his wife Sylvia and interviewed him and talked about how it was also Sinatra and Rodgers and Hammerstein and all the different people that he had a chance to be able to give an opportunity to with his career. So, you know, it couldn't get any bigger than that. I mean, Ed Sullivan was a giant in this industry, a giant. And to be able to have been able to spend time with him and to be able to spend time with Chuck Berry. And then, you know, the other, like whether it was John Lennon or the Bee Gees or you know, Fats Domino, Little Richard, it's endless. It's endless. So it's very, very hard to be able to put your finger. But if I had to do the two, I would say it's those two that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Steve and Jan want to know what station you work for in New York City, and can you comment on Cousin Brucey and Wolfman Jack? And they assure us they've been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 4 times, and they intend to go again, of course.
Well, as far as the different individuals I had a chance to work with and everything else, you know, through the years, when I went to New York, I worked on CBS FM. And I was on the air from 6 to 10 p.m. And I received a plaque, which I'm very, very proud of. I think it was dated 1974, so that I had the largest nighttime radio audience in America. And then after that, I was at CBS for a while. Then I went to NBC on WNBC. And again, working with top people. And I worked with Cousin Brucey for a long period of time at CBS. And it's amazing that when I was on the air, that there was another legendary disc jockey that worked at WABC called Dan Ingram, who was another legend in the broadcasting business. And I was sandwiched between these two guys. Dan was on the air. I followed him, and then Cousin Brucey followed me. And here's a person with these two legendary performers being able to do that. It was unbelievable. But I was very, very fortunate. And then, of course, doing my show on Sirius XM from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That was another thing that was really, really exciting for me. But CBS FM and also WNBC were my two main stations in New York. And, it was just a wonderful experience.
Roxanne wants to know if you're still involved with the Hall of Fame. In what capacity? Are you on the staff? Do you attend special events?
No, I was involved in the Rules and Nominating Committee for many, many years and everything else like that. But after the book and everything else, I just stepped back. Hey, I'm in my 80s, so it's a time comes a time to slow down, and let the younger people do it. I had a good run. I 50, 60 years in the business, doing what I had to do and everything else like that, and having an opportunity to do it. And I passed the baton to someone else. So it's there. There's nothing more I can do. They're always doing tremendous things. I talked to Greg Harris, the new, he's been there for a while now, the president, CEO of the Hall of Fame here in Cleveland. He's doing a remarkable job, and the displays that they have. And I'm very, very proud of the people involved with the Hall of Fame. But it's time for me to step back.
Well, you certainly paved the way, so they have lots of room to take over, I guess. I mean, to take the baton and run with it. Kimberly says that her uncle took her aunt to the Moondog balls every year until he retired to Fort Myers, Florida, due to his health. Before the COVID pandemic, as part to get her degree from Cuyahoga Community College, Kimberly's sister attended several classes that are taught right there on the Rock and Roll campus. She's missed those this past year, and she's going back to school in person in the fall, and she can't wait. So she wants to thank you. Kimberly wants to thank you for being part of getting the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about the Moondog Coronation Ball. Like I said, the first one was held in 1952, and then in 1992, 40 years, when it was approaching the 40th anniversary, I was working at the Magic, WMJI 105.7. And at that particular time, convinced John Gorman, the program director, and the station manager. I said, this was like in January. I said, in March, it's going to be the 40th anniversary of the very first rock and roll concert, the Moondog Coronation Ball. Why don't we get together and restage it? And they said, a great idea. So in March of 1992 at the Public Hall with an all-star lineup, I can't remember all the people that were on there, but there must have been about 10 acts on the bill. They did the Moondog Coronation Ball, and then they did it for a while. And I think it was a couple of years ago is when they finally stopped. But I was very, very happy to see that they were carrying on that tradition and everything else again. Mm-hmm. People really enjoyed the latter years of the Moondog Coronation Ball.
Yeah, Kimberly says her uncle went to the very first Coronation Ball. So,
1992, that's when it was.
There
March
you go.
Of 92.
Great. Other comments from people?
I just want to thank him for writing this book. I was a mobile DJ for years, and this was one of my Bibles.
Well, thank you so much. The thing is, it's hard to believe my very first book, Rock On, came out in November of 1974. November of 74. And the interesting thing, when that book first came out, it was selling for $12.95. They didn't know where to put. First of all, there was no music section like you have today, because this is the first real book by an American, because Lillian Roxanne from Australia had a book, Rock Encyclopedia, that came out predating my book, but it didn't go into detail like my book did. And what I did with my very first book, I interviewed all the celebrities, whether it was the Four Seasons, Paul Anka. And what I did is every time I did the interview, I let them look at the text I had, and I had them sign it on the bottom of the page if there were any corrections or omissions or anything else. And they did that. They signed it and everything else. So I had the actual information, not misinformation like a lot of books would eventually have. But when the book came out, my publisher, there was no music section. They said, put in biography, nonfiction. Where do you put it? They had no idea where to put the book. But now you go to any bookstore and you can see there's maybe 200 titles, and they have a music section, everything else. But it's amazing that book came out, and then the Rock On 2 came out, then Rock On 3 came out, then Rock On Almanac came out, then Rock On Almanac. And another thing I was very, very proud of, very, very proud, is the fact that number one, Dick Clark, who was an unbelievable person in this history of rock and roll and became a dear friend. When I approached Dick Clark in 1973, if he would write the foreword to my very first book, he had no idea what this book was going to be and everything else like that. But he was kind enough, because we had such a good friendship, that he went and wrote the first introduction for my book. And to this day, I keep in touch with his widow, Carrie Clark, out there in California. And she's such a sweetheart as well, but he was so good. And then when you asked about Wolfman Jack, when I had Rock On 2 come out, I thought, who could I get to write the introduction? So I go to Wolfman Jack. Now, these people could have turned me down. There was no money involved or any of this. And yet Wolfman Jack wrote the introduction for my second book. And then when I went to my third book, I call it the MTV Generation, right on the cover of the book, they allowed me to use their logo, the MTV logo, which was a registered trademark. And you had all the disc jockeys, Nina Blackwood, and all the people that worked as the VJs, they all wrote it. So when you have your books, your first three books with Dick Clark, Wolfman Jack, and the VJs from MTV write the introductions, can't get any better than that. So.
Gives you a lot of street cred.
I'm very, very honored by what they did. I truly, truly am. They were just absolutely sensational human beings. And like I said, we lost Dick Clark, we lost Wolfman Jack, and this is the whole thing right now. When you have some of these people that are still around, you want to be able to acknowledge them and thank them for what they've had an opportunity to do and how they've been able to help this thing called rock and roll. Because I just, there's no sad faces with rock and roll. There's one thing about this music, it just puts a smile on your face, and it just makes you feel good all over. So, and the amazing thing is all the various people that I've worked with over the years and the stories that they've had to tell. One thing I learned a long time ago, an expression was, it's what you learn after you know everything that counts. Because all of us think that we know it all. And every single day I'm learning that there are more and more things. And right now, the final thing that I'm looking forward to, I'm working with a brilliant group of individuals. We're working on a film project that could be something very, very big about the roots and beginnings of rock and roll. And we've been working on it for 2 years. We got some big, big people. I hope it comes to fruition, because, with the pandemic, a lot of people in LA weren't working in their offices. A lot of things that we wanted to do, people weren't available to do. But if this project comes through, which I'm hoping, and if it does, we'll keep you more informed about it. It's going to be something that'll be amazing as far as telling a documentary story about the beginnings of rock and roll and the DJs who played a very important role in it.
Mm-hmm. Skip would like to know who are the major contributors to your book, The House That Rock Built?
Who are the contributors?
Mm.
Well,
yes.
First of all, in New York, you have all like it says, Stevie Van Zandt wrote the foreword. Seymour Stein, who was the former president of Sire Records at the Madonna label and everything else, he also wrote a foreword in the book. Jan Wenner contributed. All the president of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in New York Foundation, all the top people there. It's all explained in the book, all the names. And in Cleveland, all the people that we interviewed, whether, like I said, whether it was Mike Benz, when Mayor Voinovich was still alive, and all the Mary Rose Okar, and then we talked to Lance Freed, Alan Freed's son, and I mean, it's just a whole long list. It's all mentioned in the book at the very beginning about all the people, but the cream of the crop, all the top people from New York and all the top people in Cleveland helped play a role in making this book happen. They all, in fact, on the back of my book, we got endorsements from the people that wrote endorsements. Okay, I got Stevie Van Zandt, Jan Wenner, editor and co-founder of Rolling Stone, Greg Harris, the president and CEO of the Hall of Fame, Terry Stewart, the former CEO of the Hall of Fame. You got Richard Celeste, governor of Ohio from 83 to 91. These are just some of the people on the back of the book who just made their comments. And inside the book, there's just everybody. They all pitched in it. So they all got behind this book 100%. And this is the book that for perpetuity will tell the story about Cleveland, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And like it says, and just like the title, it says how it took time, money, music moguls, corporate types, politicians, media, artists, and fans to bring the Rock Hall to Cleveland, the house that Rock built. It's all said there in the title.
That's true. The subtitle is an important part that I didn't memorize, but you're right. It tells all of the contributors are there, all the things. But you know what, Norm? This work, this labor of love, Kimberly says it, and I think we all agree. If it weren't for your efforts and your diligence in putting this together, we would still be piecing things to, pieces of the history together. So we are all really appreciative of the fact that you took the time to sit down and sieve through probably all of the notes and things that you have to come up with a book that has wonderful pictures in it and wonderful narration. When you get this book, you feel like you're actually in the movement. You're going through every step of the way to get the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and you feel the ups and you feel the downs and you feel the tension, like, oh my gosh, are they going to come up with the money? And then when it all happens, it's such a relief to hear that Cleveland was announced, but there was a lot of work after that even.
Well, Cheryl, I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the fact that the work that Tom Farron worked with me on this book. Now, Tom Farron's a brilliant writer who's worked with other people on books, and at one time was the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And when I approached Tom about 5-6 years ago about this project, because I always had the information, I had interviews, I had notes, I had everything else like that, but I wanted to step back and have someone talk to me about it, like on first person and everything else, and me tell the story. And Tom was a brilliant writer, and he could have gone all over the place with this thing, but it was so hard to put it all together. And he worked it because he was at that time working at the Plain Dealer, and they were cutting their staff, and they had a lot of people that weren't able to come into work anymore and everything else. So he was working sometimes 18-hour days, and then they come home at night and try to work on the book with me and everything else like that. So my hat's off to Tom Farron, and also Janet McCosker, who's a phenomenal photographer, and the pictures that she was able to take and everything else like that. And so when you work with good people like that, and like I said, my good friend Mike Benz, who's retired from the business, but he's very active in other areas right now, but he was a catalyst to put all this stuff together. So it takes these important people to make this. It's just not one person, me. It's just for me to be able to work with these people and have them. And that's why I want this to be able to be something that more people can find out about the book, because it's, I lost out on a lot, because in the past, whenever I went on tour with my books, I did Mike Douglas show 5 times. I did the Today Show 5 times. I did MTV. I did Tom Snyder's show. I was all over the place on national television. I was doing city tours. I'd go on a 16-city tour. I had articles written about me in all the Chicago Tribune, the Houston papers, the Los Angeles. You had all that going for you. And that's why my book sold very, very well. But with the pandemic, I had no opportunity to do any national, nothing in the papers, nothing on TV, nothing and everything else like that. And the book suffered. So what I'm hoping that happens, and what we're going to do, is do a resurgence in the fall with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremonies coming here, and make more people aware of it, maybe to loosen up and have a chance to get back on some of these national shows and talk about Cleveland and talk about the book and talk about how these all things came to be, and shine the light on the people who need to be able to be thanked for what they've done to make rock and roll reality, because it just isn't one person. It's a lot of people working very, very hard to make it happen. And like I said, Cleveland has this wonderful jewel called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And to go down there and see it and walk through the halls and see all the work that's been done, the people that put the displays together, that work hard in promoting it and everything else like that. I am so proud of this Hall of Fame. You have no idea. And the people. And my book is just one way of being able to get the story out and tell people, you know what, we got something that's very, very fantastic, but read the book and find out how and why. So when you travel or when you meet people, you'll be well informed to be able to explain to them if you're on a plane and where are you going? You go, I'm from Cleveland. Oh yeah, you got the Hall of Fame. Hey, yeah, that should have been in New Orleans. How come Cleveland got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? You'll be able to answer them. So that's what this whole thing is about, just to be able to tell the story and the actual story.
That's very true. That's very true.
I just ordered it.
Great, Larry.
It'll be here Saturday.
There you go. There you go. It's wonderful. Yeah. Really, it was really just to pick it up and hold it, like you say, the pictures, narration, everything went together really well. So really, hats off. It was a job well done. And I think it is true.
I'll say this one thing. Here's another thing that people don't know. Let me explain this. In 2015, 6 years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago, do my math. I went off to New York and met with my literary agent, and he was taking me around to all the different publishing houses about writing this book. And we went to Time Life, and Time Life loved the idea. And Time Life, this was a Wednesday, in May of 2015, I'll never forget. Time Life was a female who was the editor there and everything else. She loved the idea. And I was going to go on Friday and sign the contract that Time Life was going to do the book. Well, we went to the office on Friday and she was let go the day before. So she was no longer there. And I had to fly back to Cleveland the next day. So I flew back to Cleveland. And I was, oh, you have no idea. Again, the disappointment. I said, oh my goodness. Now what do I do? Start from scratch, go back to New York, do it all over again? And I was sitting in my office and I turned around, I looked on my bookshelf and I was looking at rock and roll books I have. And I pulled out this one book and it was done by Kent State University Press. And I looked at the book and I flipped through the pages. It was well done, really nice, everything else. So I decided to call over there and I called up the editor, Will Underwood. I says, Will, I'd like to meet with you. I had an idea for a book. So we met with, he had another person with him, and we sat down and we talked about the idea of being able to do this book. And then the next day I called up Tom Farron, asked him if he'd be involved. And as I said, the rest is history. But the point of it is the same thing again. Had I, on that Saturday, when I flew back to Cleveland, said, well, that's it. The deal is blown, everything else like that, it'll never happen. And now to look at the book and say, you see, never take no for an answer. Never.
Perseverance pays off, doesn't it?
There you go.
Yes, and Skip is saying that he would be happy to promote your book on his classic rock band Facebook page. He belongs to a band called the Hitmen in North Canton. And so when you're ready to introduce it, I can hook you two guys up so that you have emails, and that can work out very well for everybody.
That would work wonderful, Cheryl. It really, really would,
That'd be great. Yeah, great. Well, listen up, folks. It's 7:21. And Norm shared with me that he has some people coming to his house for the NFL draft. So
yeah, we had no idea when we booked this that it was going to be draft.
We didn't know.
I got about 10 of my buddies to coming, all with their shots. I'll be destined. We're all going to be together, but everybody got their shot. I got my second shot 2 months ago, so we're all clean there. We got a lot of space, but we want to watch the draft because we're major fans. And Cheryl, I want to say I can't thank you enough for the time. And I hope I didn't step on anybody's time, anything else like that. But again, thank you for allowing me to be able to share my story with your viewers.
Well, I want to thank you because we are not a very big group, but we all have tentacles that reach out to other people, so we can promote it as well. And the recording will be on the website, on the library, so we'll promote that too. And thank you so much, Norm, for all your expertise, because nobody has lived a life like you have and put this all together for the rest of us to enjoy and for generations to come to enjoy.
Well,
It's
I feel like George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life. How he says, no man is a failure who has good friends and people like yourself. That makes all the difference in the world. So again, this book is a love letter. It's a homage to the people of Northern Ohio and to the world of rock and roll. So again,
well,
all I can say is rock on. Thank you.
yes, that's right. Rock on. All right, everybody. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for all your comments and your input. Makes it for a very interesting evening. And Norm, again, thanks so much, because we've had a wonderful evening learning about the city of Cleveland and about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and how it got here. So the next time we go, it's going to be more special than it was before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
night. Thanks.
Bye.